And if you were to go to the Foreign Journalists Association to provide training for foreign journalists who have just arrived in China, what would you like to tell them? What do you think are the necessary quality for foreigners to work as journalists in China?
Yeah, the most important thing is to learn that there are different perspectives than your own. That's a very, very important topic, that you understand the history of China, that you understand where they are coming from, where they want to go, and that you, before you judge, that you start to listen carefully, and that you still stay curious about probably surprising answers. Sometimes journalists tend to have their idea already how China is or how China has to be, and then they know the direction of their story already, and then they look for some quotes, and then the story is finished. What I would advise newcomers in China: just be open-minded, listen to them, understand why they are saying certain things. And again, it doesn't mean that you have to have the same opinion, but probably it's at the outcome there is a more realistic picture on China. It doesn't help us if we write about a China we wish it would be, and then don't see it like it is. Because then again, I said it already, then we make the wrong strategies, and then we are in trouble. So, for example, many journalists were writing, Chinese cannot be innovative. This was the common sense. And basically, this was leading us in our industry into a wrong direction. And we lost a lot of time to adapt and to understand the challenge which is coming from China as well. And now the recent developments should be a wake-up call, and we should, as journalists, we should carefully observe what's going on before we decide if it's good or if it's not good. Actually grow. People, also normal people, understand that China is becoming more and more important, and they also realize that they don't know a lot about China. Therefore, the interest is quite big, and I have a lot to do. I give a lot of interviews, a lot of speeches, where I try to explain China, especially to the Germans. And my observation is that the interest is actually getting bigger. And people understand that if you only say we are good and they are bad, it's probably a bit too simple. So it has to be more differentiated. They want to see more details, and I also see it with my books, which are selling quite well, that there's an interest in this country, and so I'm continue to do what I have done anyways.
I have to ask you about former German Chancellor Merkel is an old friend of China, visiting China and restaurants through Europe. And our successor is also the first Western country leader to visit after the epidemic. Will he continue showing an attitude similar to Merkel's towards China?
There's continuity on one side and discontinuity on the other side. If Chancellor Scholz would be running the government with his own party alone, his policies would be probably more similar to Merkel policies. But he has to range himself with the other coalition partners, which is the Liberals on one side and the Green Party on the other side, and they have a more confrontative perspective on China. So therefore, the policy we see now is basically a compromise between these three parties.
So it's and therefore it's different from the policy Merkel was used to seen with approaching China.
And will the impact of the epidemic on Germany and China exchange be quickly compensated for?
I think the biggest problem is not so much the COVID epidemic, but more the war in Ukraine. The war showed the Germans from one day to another how much they're depending on Russian gas. And then in the second step, they saw how much they're depending on the Chinese market and on the import of Chinese goods. And this changed the whole perspective. There was basically a sentiment that was strong sentiment, actually, that Germany needs to become more independent from countries like Russia and China, which have a different political system, probably also a different set of values. At the first time, we in Germany, we thought we can simply decouple. Now we have a more pragmatic approach. We realize that it's not so easy to decouple, and now we call it de-risking. So, which is basically the goal to de-risk the dependence on those countries, but on a longer term, because you can't do it short term without having inflation rising above 20%. Because if you cut off the supply of cheap Chinese products, the products will be either not available or they will become much more expensive. And this is politically would be very risky, because then the consumers would have to pay it, and they're not willing to go down this path.
And what are the source of a German New Deal government strategy for China? How would you evaluate the current approach taken by the German government towards China? And in your opinion, what direction do you foresee for the relation between China, Germany, and Europe in general in the future?
Yes, first of all, I would say the approach is now, as I said, a much more pragmatic approach than we thought 1 year ago. So the China strategy is saying they want to do more business with China, they want to do more exchange with China, but they want to be more careful. They want to be more aware of the risk of depending on China. And this is actually an approach also doable for the business side, but also acceptable for the civil society. And that's the way, that's the path we are following now. On the European level, I see a different approach from the EU Commissioner von der Leyen, the German EU Commissioner, but I don't see so much support for her policies within the European nation states. So if you look at Germany, if you look at France, at Spain, at Holland, Italy, so then you have the impression that they all in favor of a more pragmatic approach towards China. So we have to see how this different way of approaching will shake out now. But my impression is at the end, Europe will go into the broad direction France and Germany are heading to. On the long run, what we probably underestimate is that China is not playing on its own anymore, but it's part of a broad movement of the rising BRIC countries, which have now a stronger economic, a bigger economic share in global GDP than the G7 countries. And they are working together, and they basically have a very simple goal. They want that the majority of the world is setting the rules for the global institutions. And this is a big project, but this means that the minority of the West, Europe and North America, and to some extent you can also include Japan, that they are not able anymore to set as a minority the rules for the majority. And this movement is still very much estimated in Germany, but also on the European level. And probably from this perspective, we have to become more realistic and adapt our strategies towards this new global development to make sure that we don't have the wrong strategy because of wrong assumptions. And one of these wrong assumptions is probably that China is acting on its own as a lonely player, and if we defeat China, we defeat the whole movement, and we can rescue the Western supremacy.